Good morning. Welcome to the King's Report News Hour for the 11th day in the 12th month, 16th year of Zhang Melder sitting in for the second king of General Kyung Before we start, let me do a couple of, or at least one, maybe just one household item. I received a couple of comments on yesterday's OSTP lecture. The comments came to me by email, and I responded by email, but I've decided I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm not going to respond to comments to me by email. If you want, I welcome comments, but please put them in the comments section of the YouTube version after it is broadcast live on Twitch and Rumble. Uh, uh, they get uploaded. These videos get uploaded to YouTube, and it takes about an hour, close to an hour, sometimes a little more, depending on how YouTube is feeling. Sometimes they look over my videos a little more carefully than others, but about an hour. So hold your comments until then, and please put them in the comments section of the YouTube video. Also, if you're going to present an argument based on what Father said, then please do not quote Father in English. Father did not speak in English. So if you are starting a sentence with the words Father said, and then following that with some English words, you are not giving me Father's English words. You are giving me the English words of someone who is, or a translator or interpreter, who is telling you what Father said. In other words, you're getting this information secondhand. And that's not acceptable. It's not acceptable. If you want to quote Father in the words that he approved. He did not approve the English translations, only in a couple of instances, a couple of speeches. 99% of his translations were not approved by him. Yes, he instructed some words to be translated into English, but that was intended as a crutch for people who either they're interested in the word and they're just coming into contact with Father's words, or they it hasn't been very long since they joined the church and they haven't learned Korean yet. It's a crutch for those people. So at some point a baby has to stop using the walker, right? They can't use the walker when they're 6, 7, 8, 10 years old. They got to get out of the walker and start walking on their own 2 feet. So please do not quote Father in English. I think I went over this article where there was a presentation given during the Davos conference recently that a person said that AI is going to take over religions, especially religions that are based on books, a book or books. And the speaker's point was that the AI will become the foremost expert on the teaching of that religion. And that so it I suppose came as a shock, but not a surprise to me when someone actually did respond to my OSTP lecture by quoting AI, trying to disprove one of my points by quoting AI. I do not recognize the authority of AI to teach us about Father's words. All right, especially if that AI is quoting Father in English. So it's a double trouble there. Double trouble. Okay, all right. Enough of that. So please put your comments in the YouTube section, the comment section on the YouTube videos. Because, I mean, if you want to, don't just respond to me sort of emails, sort of you are sort of whispering in my ear, just sort of secretly, I don't want anybody else to hear this, but I have this to say about what you said yesterday. No, Let everybody hear. Let everybody hear. Okay. All right. So let's take our sojourn around the kingdom right now. We are in the dead of winter, and this actually is in my experience, the final week of January tends to be the coldest in the northern hemisphere, in the temperate zones of the northern hemisphere, at least in it. I hope that's the case this year as well, because it's getting pretty cold out there. Chongpyeong, Tennessee, 19 degrees and clear right now, and getting up to 34 today. Cold with partial sunshine tonight, cloudy at 23. Father's hometown, Jeongju, North Pyongan Province, clear, and Korea, of course, 10 degrees right now, above zero, but a real feel of 1 degree below zero. And today, I'm sorry, tonight getting down to 2 degrees below zero. Tomorrow, partly sunny and cold, high of 24. And then, wow, the Cheonryung Palace in northeast Pennsylvania. I had to check to make sure that maybe this wasn't somehow erroneously set to Celsius. I have a 6 degrees below zero right now. My goodness. But don't worry, the real feel is only 5 degrees below zero. Okay, it's clear skies. Times of clouds and sun with a couple of flurries. Cold, extreme cold, and high of 22 today. Tonight, mainly cloudy, mainly clear. I'm sorry, mainly clear, bitterly cold, and 4 degrees below zero there tonight for a low. Of course, that is minus 20 on the Celsius scale. In Limestone County, Texas, at the Liberty Rec RV Parking Campground, 33 degrees and clear. So Texas also is going through a very cold period. 62 for a high today. Areas of freezing fog this morning. Periods of clouds and sunshine. Tonight, partly cloudy, brisk and cold. Low of 29. Oh, yeah. And then at the Suncheon Palace in Korea, South Korea, 31 degrees and clear. 23 for a low tonight, increasing clouds, and tomorrow chilly with considerable cloudiness, high of 37. And let's see here. This is the Gunma Palaces in Japan, mostly clear at 35. Tonight, getting down to 26, a couple of evenings, snow showers, otherwise partly cloudy. Tomorrow, times of clouds and sun, high of 45. Guangzhou, Guangdong, China, overcast and 68. Thank you. At least someplace it's warm. 68. Getting down to 60 degrees tonight, mostly cloudy with a couple of showers around, mainly late. Tomorrow, cloudy with a couple of showers, mainly early in the day, high of 70. Okay, let's go to Father's words. And of course, I'm looking at the Korean Samsung, all right? Let's see, where are we today? Earthly life in the spirit world. Okay, chapter 7, the relationship between us and the spirit world. And here we're looking at the somewhere in the middle of a long quotation, several pages long, quite a few pages long. Okay. At the end of chapter 7 is the final subheading of chapter 7. Okay. Anyway, so from this perspective, so we're in the middle of a speech, all right? From this perspective, the same is true with you. Okay. Let's see how he explains that. If you just believe as an individual and do not have a family, then because you did and you die without having a family, okay, just as an individual, then because you did not have a family, you will still have to go over the family standard, the tribal standard, the ethnic group standard, the national standard, and the world standard, the various stages. So it may take you, well, Father says, Ongmanyan. Ok, of course, is 100,000, right? And man is 10,000. But so man, of course, in Japanese, Korean, Chinese, just symbolically represents a very, very large number. For example, we say manse, right? So, and Ongmanyan, like Ongmanse, right? Ongmanse. Originally, no one says Ongmanse. Only Father said Ongmanse. Everybody else says Manse. 10,000 years. All sort of multiplies that by 100,000. So it's super long, super long. So Father said, So if you have to go through all those stages, it's going to take you ongmanya. Nyan, of course, is years, so it's going to take you 10,000 times 100,000, a very, very long time, super long time. Um, and then he says in the next sentence, 그것은 무한에 해당합니다. That corresponds to eternity. Yes, so it's going to take you all eternity to go through those stages. Jesus too, because he could not go beyond the standard of the nation, and he had to return and and go over the standard of the nation, and it's only then that he can enter heaven. Jesus right now is in paradise, and it is the same logic for him. When is Father saying this? This is in 1972. Of course, it was after this that Jesus was blessed. Right. All right. So praise God. Yes. So yes, don't just believe by yourself. You gotta have a family, gotta have tribe, ethnic group, nation, and world. Otherwise, it's going to take you ongmanyon, ongmanyon. All right, let's see what's happening. Of course, uh, the whole situation in China is getting well. We have to separate though the it's difficult to do, but we need to pick through what is actually happening to these sort of uh, uh, the action movie scenarios that are being written based on this, and some things are pretty obviously false. For example, um, this idea that uh, this man or this general Zhang Yosha was arrested because he leaked nuclear secrets to the United States, and this has been debunked pretty clearly, pretty early in the process by experts. And apparently, this is something that has come up before, and experts that I've seen say that this is kind of like they're throwing everything at him to see what will stick, basically. But certainly, but this has not been reported in the Chinese press, so it's only being reported for foreign consumption, especially in the English language sphere. So that looks to be pretty. I think that's generally regarded as pretty obviously false. And the other thing is that this whole thing about there being shots fired on the streets of Beijing. Uh, the sources that I consider to be credible are looking at that with a high degree of a skeptical viewpoint because they're saying, well, wait a second, if that's true, then there are all sorts of embassies in China, and if they had heard the shots, then they should be reporting us and things like that. I saw one channel or one, I guess, YouTube video that showed sort of explosions, I guess, going off on the horizon. But we don't know what those explosions were. There could be firecrackers, could be other things, or the video itself could be manipulated. We don't know. But if there were explosions going off, then someone in the Western press or somewhere would have been reporting this. And I have not seen that. And also, the people that I look to for credible information on China are looking at that very skeptically. Uh, and I have this one, X poster that says that, oh, Zhang Yongxia is holed up in the headquarters, and Xi Jinping has gone off into the Western Hills, and yet he had lunch today with the British Prime Minister, not in the Western Hills. so, so I think remember that people on X, people on YouTube, they live and die by clicks. And I think it's important for us to always remember that, and always remember also that no one is going to go to jail for lying to us. No one goes to jail because they told us a lie. So we need to be very careful about where we place credibility. And Uh, there are some channels that are actually naming their sources, and there are other channels that are not naming their sources. And I think I tend to put more credibility on the channels that are naming sources and actually doing responsible journalism. And others, they just, if you don't have to name your source, you can make up stuff all you want, and you don't, and you can say anything that you want. So let's be careful. But what we do know, though, is that what we do know a few things. We know that Father is working somehow, and we know that the uh, People's Liberation Army, the the military arm of the Chinese Communist Party, is now headed by a man, um, Xi Jinping, uh, who has very little, anyway, very little military experience, or maybe no, especially no command experience. And that in itself is a rather dangerous thing, because it would be easy for him, or likely for him, to make a strategic mistake, such as, for example, deciding to attempt an invasion of Taiwan. Uh, and so, in that sense, I think, and not just me, but others as well, think that maybe the danger for Taiwan, at least in the mid to long term, has increased rather than decreased as a result of this whole situation. Although it may have decreased in the very short term. Well, because Xi Jinping needs to bring up people. He needs to find people he can trust, and there may not be that many, right? I mean, the guy really is incredibly paranoid right now. That is obvious. That we know that he's incredibly paranoid, and he's not just knocking off his enemies, but also his erstwhile allies as well. But remember the guy that I told you about who has experience with dictators in North Korea said that a dictator has no allies really when it comes down to it. The dictator's ally is himself, and that is all. No, he has no one else as an ally. So anyway, let's be careful, but also pray, continue to pray that God's will be done there in China with the whole situation. Yes. Uh, It'd be interesting if this turns out to be 10, 20 years from now, this turns out to be the turning point for the downfall of the Chinese Communist Party. That would be interesting, but uh, we have to wait and see how this whole thing develops. There are plenty of people in China who will be doing everything they can to maintain the power of the Chinese Communist Party because their own power, their own survival depends on it. And they will be working very hard to keep the whole sort of house of cards from falling apart. Okay. But on the other hand, we have these Western leaders right now uh, going to China to what they call resetting their relationship with China because they don't like President Trump, and uh, so they are trying to cozy up to China now in hopes that this will sort of teach Trump a lesson, I guess. And of course, Keir Starmer is the most recent of those. As I said, he had lunch and talks with Xi Jinping today. In here, Starmer meeting, Chinese leader tells PM he hopes both countries can rise above their differences. And of course, there are many differences, or anyway, there used to be anyway. Uh, in 1997, the UK returned Hong Kong to China based on the promise that the freedoms in Hong Kong would be respected for 50 years. And let's see, has it been 50 years? No, it's only been 29 years since that, less than 29 years since that return or handover was made. And of course, Hong Kong's freedoms have not been respected at all. And conservatives in the UK are pointing this out, but Keir Starmer doesn't care about that. China agrees visa-free travel for British citizens as countries sign agreements on closer economic cooperation. So, despite those differences, really, they are sort of kowtowing to China's demands there, right? Notice how when they shake hands, all right, uh, this is arranged by the Chinese so that Xi Jinping is facing the camera square on, whereas he has to make a slight turn with his right hand in order to take the right hand of Xi Jinping. And that's by design. That puts him in the subject partner position and him in the object partner position, with him in the senior position and Starmer in the junior position. This is by design. The Chinese leader Xi Jinping has said the UK's relationship with his country had gone through twists and turns over the years, but that a more consistent approach was in both their interests. Ahead of the talks with Keir Starmer during the first visit to China by a British Prime Minister in 8 years, she said the two men would stand the test of history if they could rise above differences. China's been talking a lot about history, right? They keep talking about how Japan needs to be kept in its place as a defeated country of World War II. And uh, now he's telling Starmer to let's stand the test of history. In the great remember that in Marxism, in their historical dialectic, they believe that communism is the future of mankind, represents the future of humanity, and of course the entire world needs to come under communism in Marxism. And that is the basic understanding of the historical dialectic of Marxism. And so that's what Xi Jinping is referring to here, that UK can also come under communist rule if they stand together. In the Great Hall of the People in Beijing, Xi also appeared to reprimand Kemi Badenoch, the conservative leader, who has criticized that. Is that how you pronounce that? It's the first time I've seen that name. Who has criticized Starmer for traveling to China this week. There has been cross-party concern. This, by the way, is The Guardian, which is a Marxist paper. There has been cross-party concern about China's spying activities in the UK with the traveling number 10 delegation, number 10, of course, being the official residence of the UK Prime Minister, number 10 delegation operating on burner phones and also Beijing's human rights abuses. Burner phones, those are usually used by gangsters, aren't they? Okay. Oh, my goodness. However, the UK Prime Minister began the trip by saying he wanted to bring stability. Ah, yes, this is of course Xi Jinping's favorite word, right? Stability, yes. Stability under the gun, yes, but stability, okay. What do you want? Stability and clarity to the bilateral relations after years of inconsistency under the Tories when it went from golden age to ice age. Uh, After their meeting, Starmer said the relationship between the two countries was now in a good, strong place after productive talks and made a series of announcements that could unlock new opportunities for British businesses. Oh my, so now the Brits are going to go in and get eaten up by the Chinese. Okay. In a significant move, China agreed to a visa waiver for British tourists and business travelers. Wait a second, wait a second, wait a second. You can go in, but the question is, can you come out? better watch out. Ending the requirement for travel to be no more than 30 days and bringing the UK into line with 50 other countries. The UK also signed a series of agreements with China on closer economic cooperation, including greater trade and services, making it easier for British firms to operate there, including a 150 billion or 15, I'm sorry, $15 billion investment by the pharmaceutical firm AstraZeneca in its Chinese operation. Downing Street said the meeting was constructive on a number of issues, including the fate of the jailed Hong Kong pro-democracy activist Jimmy Lai, whose release the UK has urged, and the lifting of sanctions on British MPs and peers. Okay. Well, we don't see Jimmy Lai coming out of prison, though, do we? Basically, the uh, imprisonment of Jimmy Lai and represents the final nail in the coffin of democracy in Hong Kong, according to many people. And uh, if if anybody in the UK thinks that there was anything that constructive that was done with respect to Jimmy Lai, they're really fooling themselves. I don't know why this paragraph is even in there. It's completely disingenuous. Yeah, okay. So I suppose Starmer sort of paid lip service. Said, "Can you please release Jimmy Lai?" Wink and a nod. I have to say this because of my people back home, but I don't mean it, and I understand that you're going to ignore what I say. Maybe that's the context to where this Jimmy Lai came up. He's actually a British citizen, and so I suppose Keir Starmer uh, was required to say something, but Xi Jinping just he probably chuckled in his mind and just sort of threw that one in the trash. Yeah. The leaders discussed the Ukraine conflict and were quite clear they have the same goal of ending the war, with peace talks playing a part. But number 10 would not say whether Starmer, who spoke to Zelensky on the eve of his visit, pressed Xi to try to restrain Russia, because he did. With Starmer under pressure at home not to sacrifice national security for the sake of closer economic ties with the world's second biggest economy, Downing Street confirmed that security was discussed more broadly. It said there were constructive discussions on rebuilding the UK embassy in Beijing. Recently, the UK has given permission for Beijing to build a new embassy, a super embassy in London. And there's been a lot of discussion in the UK about the fact that China is going to use this embassy in London to spy on the British on British people on the UK. But uh, Starmer government has given its okay for that anyway. And it was on that basis that China allowed this visit to take place in the first place, and also is now allowing the British to build a new embassy in Beijing. But we'll see. We'll see about that new embassy. I doubt that the uh, Brits will be able to build a kind of super embassy that the Chinese have built in London. In opening remarks before their talks, she had told Starmer, "Your visit this time has drawn a lot of attention. Sometimes good things take time. As long as it is the right thing that serves the fundamental interests of the country and the people, then as leaders, we should not shy away from difficulties and we should press ahead. As long as we take a broad perspective, rise above differences, and respect each other, we will prove ourselves able to stand the test of history." All right, let's see here. And referring sort of to Trump indirectly, I guess, she suggested that in such a turbulent world, it was essential for the two countries to work together for world peace. Of course, Xi Jinping's idea of world peace is a sort of a Pax China. How would you say that? uh, Peace under the iron rule of Xi Jinping. Describing the state of the world as turbulent and fluid. Yes, that's right. It needs stability, right? Xi said more dialogue between the UK and China was imperative, whether it was for the sake of world peace and stability. Yes, yes, he got that word in there somehow, didn't he? World peace and stability. That is always his key word, stability. Oh my goodness. Yeah. Starmer told Xi he wanted a more sophisticated, Starmer now talking, relationship with China. Does he mention stability? Maybe not. Uh, at the UK China Business Council later, Starmer told delegates she had recounted a story about blind men being presented with an elephant. Oh no, not the elephant. Oh, my goodness. Uh, the relativistic elephant. All right. All right. So yes, Starmer, I guess, anyway, helped Xi Jinping to prove that he's not holding on Western Hills as some people are saying, but that he's actually doing the business of being president and um, is actually or is putting on a show at least of well, stability. Yes, he's putting on a show of stability. All right, so that's what we know from Starmer's visit. Okay. Okay. All right, let's see here. Also, we need to look at what's going on in Japan. Um, Japan is, let me just review this fact that Japan has put itself in an extremely important position in terms of the world economy. I'm sure you're all familiar with the Japan carry trade by now, where Japan, until now anyway, the past 30 years, Japan has kept interest rates very, very low so that people can, also Japanese, but also people from outside Japan can come in and borrow money in Japan at very, very low interest, and then take that money outside of Japan and invest it in, assets that give a higher yield. For example, if they can get a 1% interest in Japan, but then invest that in another asset outside of Japan that gives a 5% yield, then they're making a 4% profit. But but Japan, but the problem with Japan though is that this put Japan sometimes in a deflationary situation, and even though uh, deflation in the future is going to be a good thing because in a deflationary situation, the value of your money is going up instead of down, as it is in an inflation economy. But right now, all countries have debts, right? Every country has debts, and if you're a debtor, then you don't want deflation because it is actually increasing the value of your debt. It makes it more difficult for you to repay that debt. So you want inflation because inflation devalues your debt. So Japan has been trying to increase inflation, and they finally succeeded. But that means that interest rates in Japan now can rise, and they are rising. They have risen. And what does this do to the Japan carry trade? Well, it shrinks the profit margin. And then people who have done those investments are saying, well, wait a second, we better repay that loan to Japan, and let's get out of this. Let's look for profit some other way. But now comes Sanae Takaichi, who is uh, taking a different stance, and she's saying, well, let's spend, because we want, so that's going to cause more inflation. That's going to bring rates up even more because the central bank is going to try and control that inflation. And also she's reducing taxes. So anyway, let's take a look at what this article says about that, because this is actually affecting all of the, basically the whole world. And by the way, she's of course is in the midst of an election campaign right now, and the election day is a week from Sunday. Yeah, it's a week from Sunday. It's a very short election campaign. Says here, this is in Barron's, which is a globalist financial media. Washington's patience with Japan is wearing thin. And Barron's is one of those sort of media that I guess people and the top 1% sometimes read, or I guess they like to read it. Yeah. But we're not there, but we can also read it. That's okay. Let's see here. Let me bring this up. Okay. Oh, good. They have about the author at the beginning. Longtime Asia opinion writer based in Tokyo, former columnist for Barron's and Bloomberg, and the author of Japanization: What the World Can Learn from Japan's Lost Decades. And here's what he says. The moment Sanae Takaichi had probably been dreading the most in her 3 months as Japan's prime minister has arrived. President Donald Trump's White House is suddenly wise to her yen depreciation gambit, and it isn't happy. The yen sharply depreciated last week as investors expressed concerns about Takaishi's economic agenda. The 7.3 trillion Japanese government bond market gyrated wildly, and U.S. Treasury yields spiked in response. And remember that President Trump wants to bring U.S. interest rates down, not up. Takaichi's economic team is getting quite the earful from U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, signaled last week that Washington's patience with Tokyo's bigger-than-labor tactics and their effects on the rising global bond yields is wearing thin. Here, okay, did I do this already? I don't think so. So anyway, Sanaenomics is almost literally focused on ultra-low rates, a weaker yen to boost exports, and giant stimulus packages to juice domestic growth. So anyway, let's continue to watch this and see where it goes. Okay. All right, this is an interesting story. Not coming to America, the 60-year immigration bubble finally bursts. This is interesting. Never heard of an immigration bubble. The U.S. has experienced various industry bubbles and bursts over the past 6 decades, including the 1990s dot-com bubble and the housing bubble of the 2000s. A third bubble finally just burst in 2025 after growing for 60 years. Immigration to America. Multiple reports show that the U.S. experienced negative net migration in 2025 for the first time since the 1970s. This course correction is long overdue and needs to continue. So more people left the United States than actually came in. The factors that led to these bubbles and bursts in 3 different industries are surprisingly similar. The tech bubble grew following the commercialization of the World Wide Web during a period of rapid internet adoption and technology startups. It was a time of low interest rates and economic optimism. The speculative market frenzy in tech stocks caused the tech-heavy NASDAQ Composite Index to rise from under 1,000 in 1995 to its peak of over 5,000 in March 2000. So during a period of 5 years, roughly. By October 2002, the NASDAQ had fallen to just over 1,000 again, wiping out trillions in market value. The reasons for the bubble bursting were speculation of overhyped emerging technologies and unsustainable business models. This should have been a cautionary tale for the housing bubble. And if you remember back then, there were a lot of companies that had no profit, but their stock price was rising, even though they had no profit. If you remember that, and of course they made a sudden end in the bubble bursting. In the late 1990s, housing prices started rising rapidly and accelerated in the early 2000s. Annual appreciation rates reached the 15 to 17% in 2004 and 2005. Meanwhile, the Federal Reserve lowered interest rates from 6.5% in 2000 to 1% by 2003, which encouraged borrowing and home purchases. Banks and lenders lowered standards, offered subprime mortgages to borrowers with poor credit, and often required little or no down payment. And it became a kind of a policy of the U.S. government in that everybody should have a home. But it turns out that owning a home is not for everyone. Government policies required Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to support affordable housing loans, and financial institutions bundled risky mortgages and sold them to investors. Like the dot-com bubble, lenders and buyers speculated house prices would continue to rising indefinitely. When the interest rates rose in the mid-2000s and home prices stalled, borrowers defaulted en masse and the subprime mortgage market collapsed, And the bubble burst as part of the 2008 financial crisis and Great Recession. Yes. Immigration to the U.S., both legal and illegal, has become an industry since the mid-60s when Congress passed the 1965 Hart-Celler Act that created the family preference system, resulting in chain migration. Spouses, parents, children, both minor and adult, of U.S. citizens and lawful permanent residents can permanently migrate to the U.S. along with adult siblings of U.S. citizens, all who in turn can sponsor their family members, creating a chain. The U.S. government has annually granted lawful permanent resident status to over 1 million aliens annually. So the left tries to say that, oh, the U.S. doesn't believe in immigration, but look, permanent resident status to over 1 million aliens annually. Approximately 75% family-based, 20% employment-based, and humanitarian, most years since 2001. Illegal immigration began increasing since the early 1970s. In 1970, the U.S. Border Patrol apprehended over 201,000 illegal aliens along the southwest border. That number consistently rose each year, first reaching over 1 million in 1983 and consistently exceeding 1 million annually through 2006. The annual number of encounters ranged from 300,000 to over 800,000 until the Biden administration opened the border to record levels of illegal immigration, over 7 million Border Patrol encounters in 4 years. Since the 1970s, the U.S. government generally failed to apply consequences to the many common types of illegal immigration, sneaking across the border, overstaying visas, working without authorization, and committing identity and document fraud to remain in the U.S. Meanwhile, employers were growing addicted to the cheaper foreign labor. Unions, which used to oppose illegal immigration, changed their position to support such immigration as source of membership and power. Politicians on the left who used to oppose illegal immigration likewise did a 180 for political power. Yeah, it's all about power, isn't it? They increased pathways for illegal aliens to enter and remain in the U.S., including creating visas for trafficking, domestic violence, and other crime victims, special immigration benefits for unaccompanied children, and default extensions and expansions of temporary protected status. For example, if there's an earthquake somewhere, people of that country get temporary protected status. They can come to the United States for a while, temporarily. But temporary, of course, means permanent. On the legal side of the ledger, the left turned temporary visas into permanent ones, increased caps and uncapped categories, watered down the asylum standards, and ignored fraud. During the Biden years, the left further inflated the bubble by weaponizing mass illegal migration for political power, votes, ballot harvesting, and census headcount. The Biden administration annually paid tens of billions in federal grants to NGOs to facilitate mass migration to and throughout the U.S. And we found that we're looking at how it is that people were actually coming from the Central America, from El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala, how they were coming. And we saw that actually there were UN people were down there encouraging people to go to the U.S. border and get across the U.S. border and helping them do that. So this was intentional. Right? The left speculated that unlimited immigration could continue indefinitely, but the record numbers of migrants, the billions of dollars in costs for states and localities, the record crime and fentanyl deaths led to the bubble bursting. Americans are very generous people. I think they may be the most generous of any country in the world in terms of public people coming in and so forth. But there's a limit to that generosity, especially if that generosity is going to be trampled on and taken advantage of. And I think that's what's happening. That is what President Trump's victory in 2024 represents. The American people are just fed up. Said, no, we're not going to take this anymore. You've taken advantage of our generosity, and it's time for you to return back home. So the Biden administration annually paid tens of billions in federal grants to NGOs to facilitate mass migration to and throughout the U.S. Okay, so the bubble bursting. Americans voted in 2024 to secure the border and conduct mass deportations, which the Trump administration quickly did in 2025. Yes, he has. The clear result is the first net negative immigration rate to the U.S. since the 1960s, per multiple reports. The U.S. Census Bureau just released its new population estimates, which show a historic decline in net international migration to the U.S. It reports that NIM peaked at, or net, that's net international migration, peaked at 2.7 million in 2024, declined to 1.3 million in mid-2025, and is projected to further decline to approximately 321,000 in 2026 if current trends continue. Brookings estimates net migration in 2025 ranged from negative 10,000 to negative 295,000, the first time it has been negative in at least half a century. Brookings expects this trend to continue in 2026. I've said that I don't think that everybody should be returned, even if they are here illegally. I think that part of the responsibility for their presence here lies with the fact that Americans voted for the wrong leaders. So I think people who are here either owning businesses or are in jobs should not be sent back, but on the condition that there is no chain migration. They cannot invite anyone else to come, and also they cannot in the future commit a serious felony. And I think those were my conditions, I think, right? And I've stated that numerous times. Pew Research reported that 53.3 million aliens lived in the U.S. in January 2025, the highest number ever recorded. By June, that number decreased to 51.9 million, the first decline since the 1960s. The Congressional Budget Office has made multiple updates to its demographic outlook since January 2025 due to lower immigration. The negative trend needs to continue. America still has millions of deportable aliens here. Resources are still going to them instead of American taxpayers. Housing shortages and costs are still too high. American college students, graduates, employees are still struggling to be admitted into universities, interviewed, hired, and retained for jobs as they compete with foreign students, graduates, and employees, and now also face AI competition in the labor market. As long as these factors continue, the immigration bubble should not be reinflated, it says. Well, also, but in the process of deporting people, though, it's becoming more and more clear that some of the ICE officers, shall we say, or agents, I don't know, what do we call them, agents or officers? Anyway, the people have received maybe not enough training, and they are going a little bit off the rails in some of the instances that we hear about. So it would be good if that can be corrected. Tom Homan has been put in charge of the situation in Minnesota, and we will see what kind of changes he's able to bring there, if he's able to sort of turn down the temperature a bit there in Minnesota and in Minneapolis. I hope so. But right now, of course, the pendulum is swinging all the way back the other way, which is unfortunate. You never are able to, once the Democrats brought the pendulum up way back, and it would be nice if it could be just stopped right in the middle, but it doesn't work that way. It's sort of the equal and opposite force that is at play here, and there are abuses on this side, but then there are going to be abuses on the other side as well. Unfortunately, that's just the unfortunate reality, which I don't like, and I'm sure you don't like either. But the cause of it, though, is the illegal immigration that took place in the first place. All right, so that's what that person is saying about the immigration bubble. I think that's interesting now that U.S. is having negative immigration. All right, let's see what else is going on. Let's see, okay. Let's go to see what the Epoch Times is talking about. I guess now the question is, so what's going to happen in Iran? We're kind of waiting to see what Trump decides to do there. Federal judge blocks DHS policy to reconsider legal status for Minnesota refugees. These are 5,600 lawful refugees, right? So, yeah. And oh yeah, I guess what the funding deadline for the U.S. government is tomorrow. I think so, right? Yes, tomorrow. And we're going to go through this whole rigmarole again. And of course, it's again the deadline is a Friday, and they always do it that way so that they have um, so that they have the weekend to work things out, right? With a January 30 deadline, right? So yeah, so tomorrow Friday is the deadline, of course. Yeah. And part of the government was funded through September, through the end of the fiscal year, but other parts, including the Department of Homeland Security, have not yet been funded beyond tomorrow. And so we will see how this all works out. So there's all sorts of horse trading going back and forth, and we'll see what they say. Okay. Anyway, it's just sort of this and that and everything. Insider reveals how Zhang Yuxia was taken from China's military headquarters. This is Epoch Times, which now some people related to Epoch Times are doing good journalism, others are not. Let's see, but the basic. Well, let's look at this. Okay, let's look at this. Okay, the sudden downfall of Zhang Yuxiang, vice chairman, has triggered heightened security throughout Beijing, fueling speculation about increasing instability. Whoa, wait a second. I thought Xi Jinping, he got instability. Oh, my. All right. Chinese regime's armed forces, yes. Because now, the top guy was taken out, and so the people, sort of the mid-level, can expect purges as well. That's the way it always works. Zhang, one of the highest ranking officers in the People's Liberation Army, was officially announced in recent days as being under investigation, along with Liu Jianli, a member of the Central Military Commission, who also serves as chief of its Joint Staff Department. However, details surrounding Zhang's removal remain opaque, in accordance with the Chinese Communist Party's long-standing practice of tightly controlling information about internal power struggles. And it is interesting that Chinese media is strangely silent and on this whole situation. Not completely silent, but they're not reporting in the way that we would normally expect reports to be. So, for example, people swearing allegiance to Xi Jinping and telling us what a terrible guy Zhang Youxia was. Those kinds of articles are not coming out as much as you would expect. That is interesting. An insider from within the Chinese military told the Epoch Times that Zhang was taken away on the spot just before an internal meeting at the CMC's headquarters in Beijing. Security arrangements at the venue had been adjusted in advance. The insider said Zhang was unarmed at the time and did not resist arrest. His personal security detail had already been reassigned months earlier, and on the day of the meeting, Zhang's guards were instructed to remain outside the conference hall. During Zhang's arrest, there was a brief physical altercation between on-site personnel and Zhang's security detail, the insider said, but Zhang himself did not resist and was quickly escorted away. The CCP has not released official details beyond the brief announcement of an investigation. The Epoch Times couldn't independently verify the insider's account. But again, here, they're not naming the source on this. That's unfortunate. Chinese state television footage shows that Zhang last appeared in state media outlets on January 12th, when he attended the fifth plenary session of the CCP's Central Commission for Discipline inspection. Liu was also present on that day. Both men subsequently disappeared from public view before the regime officially confirmed their purge. The insider said the investigation into Zhang and Liu had been conducted in secret for several months. When the CCP's top leadership decided to move against them, the case had already been classified internally as involving serious political issues, including allegations of deviating from the central leadership. Well, central leadership, of course, is a code word for who, right? Winnie the Pooh, or otherwise known as Xi Jinping, and engaging in separatist activities, right? So basically, he wasn't getting Xi Jinping's permission for everything he did. Such language points to allegations that go well beyond corruption and instead touch on political loyalty, and an especially sensitive charge under Chinese leader um, Xi Jinping, who has repeatedly emphasized absolute obedience within the military. Following the official announcement of Zhang's arrest, security levels across Beijing visibly increased, according to residents who spoke to the Epoch Times. Several said police and armed personnel were deployed more heavily along major roads, including Chang'an Avenue, which runs past key government buildings. Police checks of identification documents were reported both on streets and inside subway stations. The atmosphere has clearly tightened, said Xi, a Beijing resident who gave only her surname out of fear of reprisal. There were guards every few steps. There were fewer people and cars than usual, and everything felt tense. She also noted that some senior CCP leaders have recently been absent from public view, adding to the uncertainty. What they're doing, outsiders really have no way of knowing, she said. Other residents reported seeing armed soldiers stationed along certain main roads with government buildings, although no large-scale traffic disruptions were observed. On Chinese social media platforms, some users reported that on January 25 and 26, authorities conducted concentrated checks of rental population records in some neighborhoods. Subway riders described police ID inspections and canine patrols in station halls. Although most said commuting was not significantly affected, many noted that more security personnel were present than usual. China observers have also pointed to the unusually restrained way Chinese state media have reported on the case. Chen, a Beijing-based scholar who gave only his surname out of fear of reprisal, told the Epoch Times that coverage of Zhang's investigation was muted across major official platforms. State television mentioned it once during a midday news broadcast, but it was absent from the evening news. In the CCP mouthpiece People's Daily, the report appeared on an inside page, and some publicly accessible pages were later adjusted. Currently, Zhang's name remains listed among Politburo members on the CCP's official website. Zhang and Liu still appear on published lists of CMC members, despite the announcement that they are under investigation. That's highly unusual, Chen said. When an investigation has already been announced, you normally see names removed quickly. This ambiguity raises more questions about how the leadership is handling the case involving Zhang and Liu. Chen said that even officials within the regime, including senior figures, are unable to offer a clear or consistent interpretation of events. No one can really say what's going on, he said, suggesting that the confusion may reflect an ongoing and unresolved power realignment at the top. That means, power struggle, right? The internal situation is extremely complicated. A source close to the military told the Epoch Times that the abrupt shakeup points to deeper structural turmoil within the People's Liberation Army and could have far-reaching consequences. The CCP regime is in a transition period, the source said, and it's not a positive one. It's not moving toward greater openness. Instead, it's a clear regression. Zhang and Liu have served in senior military roles for decades, the source has noted, and their influence extends well beyond the top leadership through promotion and patronage networks built over time. This isn't just about replacing a few people at the top, the source said. It could affect an entire chain of personnel. Officers at the battalion level and above may all be subject to reassessment or removal. Even officers who never worked directly with Zhang or Liu could find their careers affected, according to the source, because their professional records are often linked through shared postings, recommendations, or advancement pathways. Once the political classification changes, people further down are inevitably implicated. At the very least, their future prospects will be reevaluated, the source said. In the short term, the uncertainty is likely to lead to tighter discipline and increased demands for obedience within the military. However, over the longer term, it remains unclear whether such measures will stabilize the system or deepen internal distrust, according to this source. For now, the priority seems to be to suppress disorder, keep things from spiraling, the source said. Whether they can actually sort it all out, no one is confident. Interesting. So this sort of relative quiet or silence on the whole thing is something that people are pointing out, and some people say that this shows that Xi Jinping is not entirely in control, that that Zhang Yosha has a lot of allies, and they're refusing to accept his removal and things like that. But that's one possible explanation. Or it could be just uh, wants to maintain stability, right? Doesn't want a lot of coverage of this because he's concerned that it may create instability. We don't know. We'll have to wait. We have to wait and see. It's a black box essentially, and as the author said, no one knows what's happening, and we just have to wait. So all sorts of speculation is possible, but Father knows. He's there. He's working. Let's pray that God's will be done. All right, gotta go. I'll be here tomorrow. Yes, God bless, Godspeed. His kingdom come quickly.